Yeah, it was an old house across over there. This house was bought from Eddie Lake, and they tore it down at Eddie Lake, and Kenny and Percy drove the wagons and hauled it up here, and then they rebuilt the house in front of the old house. Then the old house was torn down. It was the old original house. They built this house. The most of it was cypress, and of course they only paid peanuts for it because Ed Lake had burned, but didn't burn all the houses. Ed Lake was a good-sized town. So was Port Harrison. They were 2 miles apart. One of them was known for lumber. That was Ed Lake. Port Harrison was known for tar. They got tar coals right close there. I used to be able to find them. What it was is big bunches of dirt or sand piled up around, big as this yard, or not quite as big. And they would put the metal pieces in little pine trees, and the juice would run in there, and they would, 2-horse wagons would pick it up and put it to the charcoal. They would cook it, make medicine and a lot of different things from the pine trees, longleaf pine. So that was known for that, because a lot of medicine was made from it, and stuff you stick together like you have today and all. So both of them had their industry. Then at Port Harrison, people didn't have enough money to go all around the island by water. They would have a vat, they would push it across the river, and then you would go on the island, because in the early part there was nothing but horse and wagons or buggies, and they would cross over to the Georgetown side. Then another man would pick them up there and put them on the vat and take them across there. That was 50 cents for each one. Around was $2, across was $1. So that's how they did it. It was 2 miles across. So the horse and wagon would go across there. I went across there many a time. The Depression, well, I was too young to be involved, but since that time, there's been a lot of discussion about it, and I have found out a lot that we had a president called Hoover. So he was a Republican, and we slipped into a recession and had a Democrat Congress, and he tried to put in 3 bills. One was the CC camps. I was in them for 10 months, didn't like it. That paid $5 a month and room and board. And we built roads through virgin timber, and those watchtowers and stuff like that. And then he put a bill in for the WPA. That was, we had a lot of malaria through the whole country. And they took that, the shovels, and paid the people to go in the swamps and open the runs up so the water would go to the river. And malaria stopped. No malaria then. So he put these bills in, also the inland waterway. He wanted that. Democrat Party turned him down, and it went all the way into a bad depression. I was born in 15, and 29 it was at the worst. So Hoover was thrown out and Roosevelt was elected. Roosevelt took the exact same bills that Hoover had and put them back into Congress, and it passed overnight. Therefore, we had CC camps. They would pay you $5 a month and send $25 to your parents. They paid $1 a day. And they got rid of the malaria. And then they started the inland waterway. So that old Socastee Bridge, see it up there? The old Socastee Bridge, I started on that from scratch. And also, I worked on the inland waterway when that was built. But I started to work when I was 12-year-old. There was a highway going across 701, and that's not asphalt, that's all concrete, thick concrete. And my job was they didn't have the chemical then that they got now, and they would put sand around a block of it, and I would keep water in that for 24 hours, and that would harden the concrete. So all that 701 is concrete, not asphalt. So they put asphalt on top of it now and stuff. But back those days, there was no law. You could start to work when you're a 6-year-old if you wanted to. So I was working at 12. The superintendent happened to board at my house, and he gave me the job. But I would see, my father was, he was a good man, but when he said something, he meant it. And we had 2 cooks, and he told the cooks and my mother both, he says, we don't like anybody to leave here hungry. He says, now, when a man comes along, don't let him work. Sit him down on the front porch, give him all he wants to eat, and let him go on down the road. Don't let him in the house. So nobody was ever turned down. Now he was a logger. He logged over in the bay, and he'd bring home cash money. Oh, maybe 6 days he'd get $5 or $10, between 5 and 10. But now you could buy a barrel of flour for $1.50. It's not like it is today. Today, things is going up. And I don't think it's changing. I think it's getting worse. I don't think that you take the Democrats and the Republicans and shake them all up in a bag and pour them out, you wouldn't know what's coming out because they're all for the self. They're not for the people. And I don't know. I don't think we're gonna get well anytime soon. But the Depression was a bad thing. I remember in 1933, we didn't have the transportation like we got now. We walked. The highway was built, and me and my brother and two other fellas, Cliff Moore and another, anyhow, they're all dead now. We was in Conway, and they had produced and made a law where they could sell beer. And one store had Arrow beer in a bottle. So Harold and I, my brother and I, bought one.
Just one?
For together. Well, yeah, it's all the money we had.
Oh, okay.
And if you had 50 cents in your pocket, you're rich. You had plenty to eat. We had plenty to eat, plenty of clothes, but there was so many people. This one man had a wife and 2 children. He had no job. He always thought to kill himself, but what good did that do? Anyhow, he took his wife and kids back to their mother and father, and then he wouldn't eat on them. He left. He would pick up little jobs for a meal, hungry. He said that sometime he'd go for 3 days that he couldn't find nothing to eat. Then you'd find somebody that had a little something and give him to eat. But I went to Baltimore in 1936. And the man told me, he says, I was in the bread line all during the Depression, but I'll never go through another one. So he says, I'll kill myself before I do it. People kill themselves all over this country at that time. They'd lose everything, or their children would be crying for something to eat. He couldn't supply it, he'd kill himself. That's stupid. I'd be out there trying right on. I'd be there today trying. I wouldn't kill myself. But they killed themselves, a whole lot of people. Stock market would close up, and you'd see a dozen of them kill themselves. And if you haven't seen a good change by January the 1st, we're going to have another depression. I believe it.
Very possible.
It don't look good. Instead of our government helping the people, they're hurting them. They're giving everything away, which they should supply food and put it into bread lines. They send you money. The people that's got a few bucks, all they do is take the money and put it in the bank. But if they put it in bread lines and feed the people instead of starving them, these people wouldn't have a chance to put the money in the bank. It would be used for them. Supply jobs, it doesn't matter. They could go into swamps and do the same thing they did before. Pay the people. Let the people work and put the money in circulation. But we're not doing that. We're giving it to them, and the people don't appreciate it. They're taking the money and won't work. People, the character today of a human being is nothing to compare with the character of what it used to be. It used to be a man was a man, and he was the man of his house, and the women appreciated it. Today, it's a different story. Usually the woman is the man of the house. There is no reason to have fights if you try to use common sense. Two people very seldom have the same exact ideas, but both of them has a right. You have a right to what you believe. I have a right to what I believe. And because I don't believe like you, why get mad at me? But that's not the way it is no more. Like my father, he left daughters. You see a man, you'd see a man coming. He'd have a stick most of the time, and a red handkerchief tied on that stick, and it on his shoulder. He'd walk up. And my father, he told the cooks, he told my mother, you feed him. Don't let him in the house. Don't let him work. Feed him and send him on down the road. Now that's the way it went. To my opinion, he was right. There's no question. Nobody argued with him. They did what he said. What you did, you helped the man. There was no harm done nowhere, and he's on down the road. I thought it was a good job. But today, you'd get an argument from one of them. My family was very fortunate. We didn't have a lot of nice clothes, but we did have, each man would have a suit of clothes. And the women made their own clothes. There's sugar sacks. And a lot of stuff come in sacks, cloth. And I saw this so many a time. When they would empty the bag, they would take the cloth, they would wash it. They would buy dye and dye it the color they wanted to and make a dress. And it was a nice looking, very nice dress. People made their own patterns out of paper. They know what to do. And they didn't buy toilet paper. There was no such thing. They used magazines, Sears and Roebuck. So anyway, as my brother used to say, you know what a corn cob is? He says, I always carry 2 red cobs and a white one. So I said, oh, why the white one? He said, to see if the red one's done a good job. People look back on those days and says, what in the world, how could you have a good time? That must have been awful boring. No such thing. We had a better time you got today. Today you got to have a bottle or something like that. Those days we cooked with wood stove. And we used pine trees to split them up. So you'd take a few chickens or blue cane syrup and pull it into candy. Or you'd cook a big chicken bog and they'd take the mules and stuff and bring up big logs and get maybe 40 or 50 young people would come up that night. And the boys would show off, take crosscut saws and saw it into blocks Others would split it. The girls would take it and stack it up. Everybody laughing, having a big time. Come time we had plates we all would eat and have a big, you really had a better time than we have today. So we would have like Cat Island or Bucksport, Port Harrison or someplace. The boys would go fishing. They'd fish all evening. That night the girls would all be down there and we'd clean the fish and cook fish. Everybody having a good time. So we didn't have the bottles that we have today. And a lot of things that it changed, but we all had a good time. You get married, the girls would get together and talk about first nights and all like that. They'd have a big time. So all these things went on those days the same as it does now. The only thing it was a little different. They hide it more then. And if you happen to get pregnant, oh, that was a disgrace. So she stayed inside the house until the baby was born. So now it's a good thing. Yeah, now, ooh, boy. What gets me today, back those days was a little different. The girl is to blame and the boy is set free. I don't understand that. It looks to me like he is just as much or more to blame than she is. But no. The boy did a wonderful thing, but the girl pays the price. Yeah, of course. There was a few that had Model Ts. In fact, we had one. And a lot of times it's called a strip down. The top goes bad and you got no top no more and you don't put one on it. And in town there was a half a block, and I know exactly where it's at today. They call it the mule stable, and they traded, they sold and traded horses and mules and stuff like that there that they don't have today. And my grandfather, he, W.R. Lewis, he had 1, 2, 3, I believe it was 3 black kids. His cook was black, and along with his wife, he got them all pregnant. You know, my grandfather was very rich, and rich people do what they want. If that had been a poor man, they'd run him out of town. Ku Klux Klans would have got him.
That's the truth.
But a rich man, he owned the bar in town. My mother's brother lived up the road here about 2 miles. And he had 2, 3 kids. One of the boys was about 12-year-old. And he rode the horses, but his daddy went to town that day. So the boy couldn't read. So the mother writes my father a note, told him that her old man going to town, come on up and let's have some fun. So my father, he was down there. My mother was at the house, but she saw him. The boy rode up, and she knew, of course, who he was, her brother's kid. Handed my father a note. My father read it, tore it up, wrote it down. So he told the boy, all right. So my father come to the house, on down to the barn, and saddle up his horse. So he went up the road. My mother goes down there and picks up the pieces of paper, tapes them together, and read the note. And she hid it. She put it away. Didn't say nothing. So when my father and she was in the barn having a big time, the boy walked up and caught him.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
And then he told his father. So then she claimed it was rape. So my father left town, boy. So he went up to his people up Red Hill up in there. He went somewhere anyhow. So anyway, my mother never said nothing. Let them all worry. So decided to have him in court. Her brother came up to the house. My mother had a bulldog and had him trained. The dog did what she said. He'd eat you alive or he'd let you go. So Dave, her brother, came up at the gate and hollered. And my mother says, "Come on in." The dog lay back down, so he came onto the porch and they talked. She still didn't tell him that she had the note. So anyhow, they had it in court. Now, my rich grandfather, of course, got the lawyer for my father.
Bailed him out of jail.
And here they had the court. So when my mother thought it was just right, that just before they convicted him, she walked up, handed the judge the note. The judge read it, dismissed. They freed him right there because he asked her who wrote the note. So she couldn't deny it. She said that she wrote the note. So he dismissed the case right there. So my grandfather took all the jewelry over to the bar and set them all up. So my mother and father had the horse and buggy, you know. That's the way they had to travel. And they had plenty. My father always had a pretty horse, boy, ready to go. My mother had a nice one. So she had Rob-Roy, that was her horse. So they was coming back home, and just as they started to come out of town, dirt road, somebody reaches up and grabs the reins of the horse from outside. It was dark. They didn't know who did it. But my mother hollered that horse. Knocked him down everywhere. I don't know if they run over him or not, but anyhow, they would come on home. And then her brother came up and admitted to my mother that he was wrong and everything was all right from there on out. Everything that smells can be ironed out, maybe. But anyhow, the girls, my father's half sisters and brothers, when he died, she was pregnant, or pregnant right after he died. And she claimed that it was him that's what killed him. And the girls laughed at a girl, I'm telling you. Winnie Ruth was the youngest one, and the others I knew them since I retired, but they all dead now. But it was so funny. The girl said my mother was lying. She got pregnant after my daddy died. We know it. If I understand it right, it was claimed it was Winnie Ruth. If that was Winnie Ruth, she was a pretty big girl, but very beautiful. Long, beautiful blonde hair. I'm sure it was Winnie Ruth, the one that they claimed that, she claimed that And he got her pregnant the night he died. But the girls, the older girls said that Winnie Ruth belonged to, they told who here in town, a lawyer.
Oh.
Yeah. So anyhow, she told it, she got by with it, but the girls all said, my mother's lying. So the girl didn't look like none of the family. The girl was beautiful, she really was. Her name was Winnie Ruth, and she stayed in Baltimore a while. She finally got married, and she lived at the beach. He offered my father Windy Hill. You know where's that? 300 and some acres. He told my father he could have it. He owned the whole thing. My father said, I don't want that thing. You can't raise nothing on that old sand. And look at it today. Back yonder wasn't near as bad as people try to make out like. People didn't have, a few had millions, but people lived with, during the Depression, one thing I will tell you, and I think I still have the books. There's a church over here called Mineral Springs. It's burned down now. The dope people took over it. But there's a spring over there that has never in my life gone dry that I know of. People would come from everywhere and get water out of that spring. That's why they call it Mineral Spring. They had Sunday school during the Depression over there. And of course, most of the children and all would go to the church on Sunday. And I had the book where they kept the amount of money come in and I got the book somewhere here. I went over there and found it in the church and it was empty and I got them all, books and all, I brought them.
Really?
Yeah, it was still under the desk and the old organ was still there. I wish I'd have got that. But anyhow, 3 cents was a collection for Sunday. The preacher, he was a little fat, squabby fella. I know his name, I can't think of it right now. They had no money to pay him. They paid him in grits, sweet potatoes. They filled his house with something from food. That's all he got. Dr. Dieter asked me what I eat for breakfast.
Blueberries and grits.
I says, well, breakfast is my main meal. He said, well, what does it consist of? I says, yellow grits, 2 of my own eggs, blueberries, sweet potato. He looked at me. No wonder you live forever.